Welcome back to the Messy Reformation. My name's Jason Rice. I'm the lead pastor at Faith Community CRC in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. My co-host is Willie Cronky. He's a member at Pease CRC in Pease, Minnesota. We're just a couple of guys who love the Christian Reformed Church and want to see Reformation happen in our denomination. But we realize that whenever Reformation happens in the history of the church, things get messy. And after this past synod, and looking forward to this next synod, things are really starting to get messy in the Christian Reformed Church. So we're taking the opportunity to have conversations with pastors throughout the Christian Reformed Church to find out what's going on in our denomination, but also to talk about what Reformation might look like. If you haven't already, take a moment, click subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. We're dropping episodes every single Sunday evening. We also want to say thank you to everyone who sponsored us on Patreon. We're slowly making our way to our modest goal of 20 sponsors at $5 a month. So if you appreciate what we're doing and want to help us continue to put out content, head on over to patreon.com/themessyreformation. You can also support us for free by sharing our content. I'm a terrible self-marketer and everyone knows that now, so I need your help. If you know of anyone who would benefit from listening to this content, let them know about the Messy Reformation. With all that said, we're going to get to this week's episode, which is part 1 of our conversation with Darren Kornelis. So, Darren, why don't you just kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and what church you're at.
Yeah, so name is Darren Kornelis. Grew up in Visalia, California. Grew up in a Christian Reformed church out there. Used to be First Christian Reformed Church of Visalia, and then it ended up being the only Christian Reformed church in Visalia. So the name First was unnecessary. So now it's Visalia Christian Reformed Church. I went to Calvin College, Calvin Seminary, and Calvin College, I met my wife, Emily. We've been married, I got to be careful, 2013 or 2012. I think it's 2013. So we're coming up on 10 years. Together we have 2 daughters. The oldest is Molly. She's 5 years old. And we have a 2-year-old daughter, Maggie. And they certainly keep us busy. They're a lot of fun, a lot of work. Great sanctifiers, certainly. Mm-hmm. And I am at Nykirk Christian Reformed Church in Holland, Michigan. I've been here coming up on 5 years, nearly 5 years.
Okay. And did you end up at Nykirk because you went to Calvin and got in Grand Rapids and were just sucked into the vortex of Jerusalem?
To some degree, sure. I did a summer assignment. I did a summer at Central Ave, or I did a summer assignment at Central Avenue in 2017, and so I worked with Chad Steenwijk, and so I had 1 year to go after that assignment, that internship, and I was kind of talking with Chad that final year about vacancies and things like that. And he told me that Nykirk was opening up. And so, my wife and I just attended on a Sunday morning and ended up talking to someone on council, giving them my resume, and got brought on as a 6-month kind of trial period. So it was a little unusual, my call, and then after that, they thought I was sufficient and they gave me a call. But I was in the area. I had worked at Central Ave, liked it here. And to be also perfectly honest, my wife's family lives in West Michigan. So there was certainly a desire to stay in West Michigan if we at all could. And I guess the Lord was merciful and opened up this opportunity for us. And so, West Michigan's a wonderful place. It's got its challenges though, but like every place, but we like it here.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. I think when everybody's just real honest about as we're looking at churches and seeking a call, right? I mean, I know all of us would say, and I think are like, hey, we'll go wherever the Lord leads, right?
Yeah.
But the Lord does work in those kind of ways where it's like, hey, it would be nice to be close to family. It would be nice to be here. And, and so we kind of look at, I mean, I've always told everybody I'm a pretty Midwest guy. I just am. And so like a church in California, even if they wanted me to go there, they probably would look at me and be like, yeah, you're probably not going to be a good fit. Now, I've been told Visalia is a little bit more rural and maybe I would be a fit over.
It is more rural, but that is true. Like there's kind of coming to the Midwest. And when people hear that you're from California, there's this suspicion that they have about you, like people say to me, oh, California, eh? Like, everything wrong in this country starts in California. And, California the people of California have people have certain assumptions about Californians. And I'm not going to say they're not unfair, but
sure.
Central California, where I grew up, is very different. It's very rural. So Midwesterners would do just fine. And I think that's what's allowed probably myself to do fine in the Midwest. But
sure. Yeah. And it just makes sense. We all have different personalities and stuff. And we can fit in a lot of different ways too. So it's helpful. I always laugh. So I grew up in Montana. And so in Montana, they have a very negative view of Californians. Everybody, another Californian moving into.
Yeah.
It was super funny. I don't, just so you know, I appreciate
that's all right. Hopefully I can change the stereotype a little bit.
But there you go. Yeah. So did you feel, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd be just curious, was it a shift for you though, to move from Visalia and to be in kind of the West Michigan area?
Yeah, certainly. Just geographically it's different. The winters were hard. The winters are still hard. And culturally it's a little bit different, but, it was a shift. It was an adjustment. And, but my wife and my family, we went to California and over Christmas, and it was kind of interesting, before we left, I was kind of wondering, it'd been like over 3 years since I'd been back there. And I was like, I'm wondering if I'll feel like this pull to go back to California, like this is home. And, didn't feel that at all. So like California felt much more foreign to me than, kind of felt like what the Midwest felt like, foreign when I was first moved out here. And so, but we like it now in West Michigan and in the Midwest. And but you'll always go where the Lord will lead. So
for sure. Yeah. What was, and I'd be curious, just dynamics of the CRC. We've interviewed on this podcast, Zach Dewey and Mark Van Dyke from, they're from, I guess you would say Almond Valley.
Not me. I wouldn't say that.
No, you say Almond Valley too?
Yes. Yeah. That was a point of contention.
All right. So they're from California.
Yeah.
And they, they've said they feel like quite a big disconnect being in the CRC church way out in California, kind of disconnect from the denomination. And now you're in West Michigan, which, the joke is it's Jerusalem of the CRC. Yep. So what's been that experience for you? Just kind of your feeling of being connected to the denomination.
Yeah, I can understand how those guys, like Zach Dewey and I forget the other name you just mentioned, but those Mark Van Dyke, those guys in Ripon would feel that way. I think West Michigan does feel a little bit insular at times. And so there's, and that can be, I think, one of the challenges, like kind of forgetting that there are Christian Reformed churches beyond West Michigan, beyond Holland, beyond Grand Rapids. And so there is, I I get that entirely. You know, like growing up in California, you know, yeah, you didn't, you grew up, you know, in a Christian Reformed church, and you knew you were part of the Christian Reformed church, but yeah, you certainly, now being in West Michigan, you see how this is different here. There seems to be perhaps like, I don't know, a stronger loyalty to the institution in West Michigan. Not to say, right, like I'm separating like institution from like the Christian Reformed Church as a faithful expression of the true Church of Christ, right? Like, I mean, growing up in California in a Christian Reformed church, you loved being a part of the Christian Reformed Church because of its confessional standards. And so there was certainly loyalty to the Christian Reformed Church, but here it seems like there's more loyalty to the institution, right? The name, and it's seems to be a stronger part of people's identity than it does in like where I grew up in the Central Valley. Yeah.
I think that's I think you're hitting the nail on the head, which is interesting for me because I've always kind of grown up in the more nether regions of the CRC, you know, where I was when I became a member of the Christian Reformed Church was in Princeton, Minnesota, right? So there's Pease was a CRC that was, you know, 15 that planted us. But then the next CRC church was like over an hour away. So there wasn't really any other CRC churches in the area. And now where I'm at, I'm a little more, I mean, not in any center, but like Waupun is kind of a little Dutch ghetto. So I've got like 5 or 6 CRC churches within 15 miles of me.
Yeah.
But it's still like nothing like Grand Rapids, right? Where there's a CRC church on every corner. And so you get out into these kind of parts, like you said, and we're Christian Reformed because, I mean, there are some, I think Waupun, there are some people who are, well, we're Christian Reformed because that's who we are, right? That's just, it becomes part of your identity. It comes disconnected from our doctrine and our teaching. It's just who we are in an unhelpful way. But I feel that a lot more in Grand Rapids anyways, that there's this, like, we're very proud to be Christian Reformed people. Not even necessarily because of our teaching, but just because of our history and our heritage, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. Yeah.
And I think that we've been talking about this quite a bit actually on the podcast lately. Like, and it sounds so negative, but it's just really true. Anytime people become more about the institution itself rather than the mission of the institution, that's actually a sign of the institution dying. Because you end up losing your mission, right? You just try to live for the sake of living and that's been for me one of the things I keep trying to point out is this will be the death of the Christian Reformed Church unless something changes. It's one of the reasons why I'm actually optimistic, because I see a group of like a younger generation that's rising up saying like, no, we're not just CRC because we're CRC. We're CRC because we believe it's a faithful expression of the true church. And so we want to see the Christian Reformed Church live that out. And we want to see the Christian Reformed Church kind of return to its mission and place in the world. And may mean the institution itself needs to look a little different, but we want to kind of get back to the basics and the core of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So, where did you go to seminary, Darren?
Yeah, I went to Calvin. I'm Calvin through and through. Calvin College, it was college when I was there, and then Calvin Seminary shortly thereafter. Didn't take much time. I think there was about I graduated Calvin College December 2013, and then started at the seminary in the fall of 2014.
Okay. Well, I guess that begs the question. I was gonna go a different direction, but I want to jump backwards there. So you went straight from college into seminary. So does that mean you've kind of always felt a call to ministry? Was that kind of the plan growing up, or?
Sure. Yeah. The call to ministry, I've always said for me was very gradual. And there was always great fear and trepidation. It was kind of one of those things where like you kind of felt this pull and this calling towards ministry. And so I kind of was halfway giving myself to it. And so it's like I started at Calvin College, and, I was growing up and I went to Christian school, elementary school, middle school, high school. Favorite classes were always my Bible classes. It's always what I wanted to talk about, what I wanted to study. And so I got to Calvin College, and, I was like, I think I'll do secondary ed. I come from a line of Christian school teachers. My dad's a Christian school teacher, my grandma, and so forth. And it's like, I'll give that a go. That seems to be in the blood, in the genes. And then at the time, my first semester, I'm taking some courses for that degree. And I'm also taking my just theology course. And it's like, well, this is what I enjoy. This is what I love studying. This is what I love talking about more than, education. I'm thankful for Christian educators. Don't get me wrong. But so I was like, okay, I'll go into theology. I'll get my bachelor's in religion at Calvin. And it's like, kind of, what you're kind of preparing yourself for, right? Because like, well, what are you going to do with the bachelor's in religion? Not much. So it's like the next step is seminary. And it's like, well, okay, but right. There was always this fear of being a pastor, right? Because you're always, even then, right? Like you understand the significance of the call, and it's not one to be taken lightly. And you're very aware of your own limitations and your weaknesses. And so, yeah. So there was always fear and trepidation. But I got my bachelor's in religion, and I was like, well, I got to go to seminary. And then, I knew really then, I was like, all right, this is where I believe the Lord is leading me. And seminary just kind of validated and clarified this calling to ministry, to pastoral ministry, to parish ministry. So that's kind of how I got here. And I went to Calvin Seminary because, like I said, I grew up in the Christian Reformed Church and was seeking to be ordained in the Christian Reformed Church. And so that's how I got here.
Yeah, no, Darren, very good. I'm wondering, how did you enjoy your time at Calvin? I know it was getting to be a little while ago since you started there, but did you enjoy your time there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I did. I'll say that. I was at Calvin Seminary, but there was definitely struggles and challenges too. So I'll say yes and no. I was at Calvin Seminary during an interesting time. I was there residentially, and I was there 4 years. And in that 4 years, there was what you could call a changing of the guard, so to speak. So, there were multiple retirements, like John Cooper, John Bolt, Michael Williams, Ari Later, Calvin Rieken. There were more. And so I had most of those professors. And so I enjoyed them. I enjoyed John Bolt. I enjoyed, John Cooper for apologetics, and I loved Michael Williams. And but there was a changing of the guard, and it seemed to be that there was kind of this concerted effort to move away from being more of a seminary where you're going to get a rigorous theological education to you're going to get now kind of like this practical, hands-on education, more of like a professional type school, right? And so, so it was interesting. I would say I struggled my last year at Calvin Seminary, but because there you were seeing more of that, and you need both. I mean, you need you need to know your doctrine. You need to know the ins and outs of Reformed theology. And of course you need to, have some experience and things like that. But there, it seemed like there was a pendulum shift, and like it was kind of overreacting. Like, well, Calvin's too rigorous. And so, so there seemed to be a shift there. So I struggled a little bit my last year, particularly. And the last year of seminary too is when my convictions personally were starting to become, they were starting to shore up and become stronger. And so the last year became a little more of a challenge, a little more difficult for me, but.
Yeah. Did you hear? Because I experienced the same thing, and I was trying to remember when did you graduate from Calvin?
2018.
Okay, so same year as me. Yeah, so we were there.
Oh, really?
At the same time. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I wasn't residential. I was distant.
Oh, okay.
So that's. But yeah, I graduated in 2018. So yeah, so we were there during the same thing. So I've explained that. You and I explained it very similarly of our experience at Calvin, seeing that massive turnover, and myself feeling a little frustrated at the lack of theological depth and the heavy emphasis on very practical matters. And, I don't have I should find the source for this, I suppose, but I remember reading back when I was getting my bachelor's, I remember reading something that a communication that came to Synod, or maybe a decision that came out of Synod, that a bunch of pastors were feeling like they weren't being equipped for ministry at Calvin. And so they were getting all the theological stuff, but then they were getting into their churches and they didn't know how to run an elders meeting, and they didn't know how to do all the practical stuff. And so I've got this in the back of my head, and I should look it up to make sure that I'm remembering rightly, but that was part of that shift, was the seminary saying, oh, we need to change, and we need to start equipping pastors now to be able to do some of the leadership and the management aspects of being a pastor. And in order to do that, they felt like they had to cut something, and that was some of the theological rigor.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, you saying that. That was kind of a frustrating thing though for me too, because it seemed like it's turning the pastorate into kind of like, to some degree, like a glorified social worker. And to be honest, that's kind of what I saw with a lot of classmates. It's like, and they had this desire to help people and see them do well and help people in poverty. And it's like, that's really good. And that's a great endeavor. But yet you saw a lot of students like, well, they didn't want to preach. And it was a bit of a struggle, because, what are our titles, right? It's the minister of word and sacrament. And they're seeking to be ordained in the Christian Reformed Church as a minister of word and sacrament. And yet they're leaving without this desire to preach the word and to administer the sacraments, but simply to alleviate and help people in dire situations. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad desire. It's a good, but I think there's perhaps maybe a little bit of confusion as to what the pastorate is. And
yeah, I think you're right on the money in a couple of different ways, really. And I've had to kind of morph my understanding of this over the years too, because you have you had said social worker, and I would say maybe even more of a negative term. I've watched some people want to be kind of the activist pastor, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, hey, if I'm a pastor, like then I can influence, it's the trendy, I'm an influencer, but you're influencing people. You can kind of try to rally people. You can be a leader, that kind of thing. And you're doing that in kind of activistic ways. But then on the other hand, I've seen other people, and this was me when I first started in ministry, who see the pastor as like a psychologist or like a counselor. Right. And so your job is just to be there to kind of listen to people's needs and hurts, and you're walking them through that. And I was just talking to somebody about that this morning before our interview, that when I felt my call to ministry, I got into youth ministry, and then we had a really broken group of teenagers. I was dealing with suicide like monthly.
Oh, wow.
So not like always successful, but either attempts or ideation.
Yeah.
And I had to do a number of funerals. And so I was like, oh, I don't know what to do here. And so I when I went to school initially in my undergrad, I was a Christian counseling major, because I thought, man, this is what I need. I need these skills. And I did need those skills to some degree, but
sure. Yeah.
At some point along those lines, I realized, but my main goal is not to be a counselor in that sense of the word.
Right.
My main goal, as my call to ministry, is to equip the saints for works of ministry. That's what the Bible says. That's why God gave us pastors and teachers. And the way that we equip the saints for the works of ministry is by using the word of God, right? I said, I always try to connect those two ideas when it comes to the call of the pastor. Is Ephesians 4:11, God gave pastors and teachers to equip the saints for works of ministry. And then 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, correcting, rebuking, training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be complete and equipped for every good work. So the tool God gave us to use is his word, not psychology.
Right.
And all of that. So I switched. I pulled out of that Christian counseling major, switched to a theology, biblical studies major, my undergraduate. And then you get to seminary, and I'm like, well, now there's this huge emphasis on now being a counselor to some degrees, or being a leader. And you are those things. But I was really disappointed at the level of theological depth and the lack of opportunities. And I had a little bit different I'll give the seminary some credit on this. I mean, I was a distance student, and so my electives were really limited on what electives I could choose. So if I wanted to take an elective on like a book of the Bible or whatever, I had to do that independent study. So I had to kind of go out of my way to try to take First and Second Thessalonians with Weimar. But the electives that were assigned to me as a distance student were all like super practical, leadership oriented, kind of stuff. They weren't just automatically trying to bolster your theology. And I think it's because we have lost to some degree the idea of what it is to be a pastor.
Yeah. And at the very least, what the primary function of the office is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, and then I just, on a real practical sense, I always ask everybody, so all of the really practical classes you took in seminary, did you still feel when you got into your first church like, hey, I'm perfectly well equipped to do this job?
Yeah. No, I mean, I was just thinking that right as you started saying that, like there's nothing. I remember at seminary, we kind of did in one of the pastoral care classes, we did role playing, where someone was given a situation by the professor, and they came to you and you had to care for them, so to speak. And it's like, okay, that's pretty practical, pretty hands-on, but it's like, there's nothing that can really prepare you to like enter a hospital room. We just had it. A 57-year-old man just died of cancer, leaving behind four kids, the youngest of which is a junior in high school. And there's nothing that can prepare you to walk into that hospital room minutes after they get that terminal diagnosis. Yep. That's just you just learn by being thrown into it.
Yep.
So yeah, it can only go so far, but you really just learn by being thrown in. Mm-hmm. And yeah. And that's been my hobby horse a little bit is, and I don't have all the logistics. I'm just trying to think through how we could
revision again seminary education a little bit and still keep that high bar of theological knowledge, because I think that's important, because pastors way more so than seminary professors. Pastors are kind of the stewards of the faith, really, amongst people. Like we're shepherding congregations of people. Even the seminary faculty can be super orthodox, but if the pastors aren't, the people aren't, and things get. So we want to hold a high bar of theological knowledge of our pastors and want them to know God and what He's done, and we want them to know that deeply. But they also need to have the practical skills as well. And so I've been talking about people kind of suggesting maybe we need to go back to more of an apprenticeship type model, where seminary is high theological teaching, but then you walk alongside someone. You kind of get baptized by fire a little bit, but you have someone supporting you. Yeah.
Well, I know the seminary, I mean, no matter what, if you did an MDiv, the shortest you could do it was 4 years, because 1 year was an internship. Mm-hmm. So you spent a full year at a church. I don't know if you were under a pastor or not, but there's certainly value in that. To be kind of just thrown in to it. And that's how you'll learn best, the practical side of it.
Yeah. And there's just like I've said, and then there's also, I think, trying to set the expectation as everyone graduates from seminary and goes off to a church to realize you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the only way you're going to learn is by messing up a whole bunch of times, just like every other profession and every other job out there. The only way you learn is to mess up.
That's how I feel as a parent right now. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But you learn, and same with the pastorate. I mean, you make mistakes and you learn from it, and God is gracious and merciful to restore and keep you going. But
and that's and I think one of the things, I've had this conversation so many times lately, is we don't know what we're doing. And I think we can all we have to be humble enough to recognize, like, when we're parenting our kids, we really don't know what we're doing. And when we're shepherding a congregation, we don't know what we're doing. And when synod meets to make decisions, we don't really know what we're doing. We're trying to figure it out the best we can, but we can't let that paralyze us and prevent us from taking any action either.
Right. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
That's been the fear. Like, we know as a parent, like, you don't know what you're doing, and you're going to make a mistake, but you have to do something. You have to pray and make a decision. And then if you messed up, then you go back to your kid and you say, I'm sorry, I messed that one up. And then you move on. Right. And so in churches, we need to do that too. I think, a lot of churches get so paralyzed about making decisions on things like, well, what if we mess up, or what if we do this wrong? And you just
you can't live in that fear, right? Because I think you just said, right, it's paralyzing.
Yeah.
And you can't be paralyzed with fear.
That's all we have for this week. If you want to help us out and support the Messy Reformation, another thing you can do is head on over to themessyreformation.com, look in the menu bar and find Join the Reformation. By clicking on that, you can sign up for our newsletter, where you'll get episodes sent right directly to your email inbox, and it will give us the opportunity to communicate with our audience, which is one of the biggest struggles of a podcast. So head on over there and sign up for our newsletter. Now, stay tuned for our next episode, which is part 2 of our conversation with Darren Kornelis. But until then, don't forget this is Christ Church, and He bought it with His blood. And we've been warned that wolves will come in trying to destroy the flock. So keep a close watch on your life and on your doctrine. Preach the word in season and out of season, and keep fighting the good fight in this messy Reformation.